So good morning. My name is David Sigler, and I am a principal associate at the Annenberg Institute for School Reform, and I head up a lot of their work on helping districts think about human capital strategy. And I'd like to welcome you this morning to our second panel, which is entitled Challenges for Measuring Educator Effectiveness. So personally, I'm really excited to be the chair for this panel because I feel like in this panel we're going to try to deal with what happens when the rubber meets the road and what happens when we take models for measuring teacher effectiveness and actually implement them with teachers and principals at a state, school, and a classroom level. And let's face it, after the first panel, it's pretty clear that doing this work well, and by well I think you mean with transparency and integrity, it's really a difficult endeavor. And that difficulty starts when we try to develop good models, and it continues when we try to implement those models faithfully across entire districts. And our goals for this panel are going to be to identify and describe some of those challenges that come up when we try to establish these high-quality evaluation systems in our districts. And then really to try to explore the experiences of our panel members, but also people in the audience to try to pull out some lessons learned and best practices as a way to sort of put a bow on this particular panel at the end. We're really lucky to have a great panel of experts with us today to help examine this topic from a lot of different vantage points. We have folks that are going to represent the vantage point from right in that evaluation and observation conversation. We've got gentlemen coming to us from a district level that have grappled with some of the questions that come with doing evaluation at scale. And we have an expert who will also help us think about how things look from the principal's seat, both when they're evaluated and their role in evaluating teachers. So for starters, we have with us Todd White, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Focused on Learning. Prior to starting Focused on Learning, Dr. White served as the Senior Vice President for the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching with the Teacher Advancement Program. Prior to these roles, he spent 5 years as an elementary school teacher before moving into school administration as a principal. He'll help us look at this topic from that really micro level in the actual evaluation and observation conversations that coaches and principals have with teachers. Next, we have the view from the principal's role, and that to help us examine that will be Joseph Murphy, who is the Frank W. Mayborn Chair of Education and Associate Dean at Peabody College here at Vanderbilt. He's also worked in the public schools as an administrator, both at school level, the district level, and the state level. From Joe, we're going to move to a level higher and start looking at things from a district and even a state level. And to help us do that, we have with us Jason Glass from Battelle for Kids. Jason joined Battelle just this past fall to lead the organization's strategic compensation initiatives and other human capital innovations. And prior to that, he was the Director of Human Resources for Eagle County Schools in Colorado. So he's going to share a variety of perspectives with us from there. And then finally, we'll hear from an individual who's working on these issues right down the road at the district level in Memphis, and that's John Barker. He's the Executive Director of Research, Evaluation, and Assessment for the Memphis City Schools. He currently, in this position, oversees state-mandated testing, grant-based research projects, school data support, and accreditation services for Memphis, one of the 25 largest school districts in the country. So for this panel, we're going to ask each presenter to just share a little bit about their work and what they've learned about this topic with you for about 10 minutes each, and then really open it up to you all for questions and insights and observations from you on the content that they give us to start off. So with that, I'll turn it over to Todd.
My perspective really is predominantly at the classroom level, even though I've worked with states and districts on these types of systems. So my heart is in the classroom. It's where the work that we're talking about doing, it's where it makes a difference. It's for students. And so as we do and go forward, understand that that's my task today, is to talk a little bit from the point of view of the classroom. Now, from the classroom level, there are all kinds of challenges with evaluation, and so in a 10-minute time frame, I've got to limit that somewhat. So we're going to pick a couple of the the most prevalent ones. And the first thing that we hear in these systems, which is extremely important, is that we're trying to create a common language around what is effective instruction. And so we've seen all kinds of instruments that come into play that people are talking the same language. The problem is they don't have the same meaning as they use that language. And so what I find in working with teachers and coaches and principals and district level people is that you've got to go beyond those systems of how do you just train people about here's the evaluation tool, here are the different categories or things that we're going to look at. Here's the protocols that we're going to use, the processes that we're going to use, into really what the meaning is of the instrument and the various pieces of that. So to make a point here, I'm going to use an example. And my example is this. As we think about, as I looked at several different instruments, one of the things that kept coming up was this notion of academic feedback and the importance of academic feedback in terms of a teacher behavior in the classroom, but also a student behavior in the classroom. And a lot of the instruments use language, for example, of high quality academic feedback. So what I want you to do for just about 30 seconds, and again, keep in mind time, define to the person sitting near you, what is high quality academic feedback? So talk to the people right beside you. You got 30 seconds to talk. Stole it. Fifteen seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, in a very unprofessional way, but yet typical of a classroom, let's do a shout out. And so as a shout out, what were some of those elements that you talked about as defining high quality when it comes to academic feedback? Timely, constructive, factual, specific, concrete, valid, actionable, descriptive. Okay, now think a layer beyond those words. And do any of those words have multiple meanings, or could they be construed to mean one thing by one person and something else by somebody else? Therein lies the problem. Regardless of what the language is that we're using, we've got to work. Love this thing, you know. There we go. I don't know if that happened from above magically or delay on this. But the point is that there's not 100% agreement. And so often the training in these evaluation systems is around the terminology of high quality academic feedback, and we don't go so far as to really trying to define that and to define it more clearly. Whoops. There we go. Oh, okay, so I also have the option, thanks Dave, of saying next slide. So as you think about this and you think about your conversation, here are a couple of indicators, and you hear and see some of the things up there that people said. Somebody said corrective, for example. But there's a lot of other concepts that go into just this one aspect of really what is high quality feedback. The next thing I want to do is I want to show you a short clip of a teacher in the classroom. And your goal with this teacher is to decide if what she's doing and saying in this minute and 50 seconds or so would be considered high quality in terms of feedback. So if we could roll it.
Mike, you're right. Okay. Tell me a little bit more. Why does the author use as and like? Who can add on a little bit more information to Reagan's excellent start? Michaela.
Well, what I think is that, like a metaphor would be like more of the mean type, but the simile would be kind of like not as mean, but kind of mean.
Oh, I'm about that, Michaela? We can use similes and metaphors both to say mean things and nice things. We use similes and metaphors both to compare two things, to tell how two things are kind of the same, okay? And I think Reagan had an important point when she said, you're talking about two things that are not exactly the same. You can't say, and Mrs. Seraphin is like a teacher. That uses the word like, but is it a simile?
Yeah, no.
No. You know why?
Because you are.
Because I am a teacher. But what if you said, when Mrs. Seraphin comes in and she's in a bad mood, she's like a witch
Yeah.
on Halloween night? Would that be a simile?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like comparing stuff.
You're comparing Mrs. Seraphin to what?
A witch. A witch.
To a witch. And you know, I'm not a witch. I'm a teacher. Okay. All right. Now, I could also say that was kind of a mean thing, but I could say a nice thing too. I could say when Mrs. Seraphin teaches us poetry, she talks like a queen. And that's a nice thing too. Am I a queen?
No.
No, but you'd be comparing me to a queen who speaks very properly. Simile.
Okay, effective or not? Okay, silence is, from a group of educators, not necessarily a good thing. It might be, though, making my point. First of all, I apologize that you didn't have the visual at the very beginning of that to go with the lesson. But in the clip, what a lot of people tend to miss in terms of instructional behaviors of the teachers and coaches and principals that I work with around the country is that she has a variety of techniques that she uses in that time period to give quality feedback. Scaffolded questions would be a way of providing feedback to kids. Examples or analogies to draw out and help kids to think about what would be right or wrong with a given answer, another technique. What I find happens at the classroom level with evaluation is we don't have that level of meaning. We begin developing evaluation systems without thinking how and giving just as much time to how we're going to train people on the meaning behind what's on the paper. So what are the things that we're doing, and not only for those people who are conducting the evaluations, but also for the teachers. It has a great deal or a great many implications for the kinds of work we have to do on a daily basis with teachers to help them understand what effective is. So the next couple of points, just to make it clear, as we're developing the systems, we have to think ahead towards who are going to be our experts. We have to have people who are experts who are working closely with our principals, coaches, and teachers and helping them to understand them. And in addition to that, we have to plan these systems so that we are developing the expertise of these instructional behaviors in our teachers as a part of what's going on. So the last, how do you do that? Obviously, you train, and then you train some more. And working. Now, this is the argument from the first panel about do you do something that's robust or you do something that's simple? If you're looking to change behaviors, you've got to do something that is more robust. One of the other points that I wanted to bring in here is that teachers and evaluators don't jump off the track when it comes to this understanding and meaning. So when they've got it and they're applying it in terms of evaluation, it's not this sudden change where we go off course. The problems with inter-rater reliability after you develop that initial understanding tend to come because of drift. People do an evaluation and they see it and they start moving their thinking over here. So when you look at a system that goes across an entire school to start with, and you've got multiple evaluators in a school, you have to watch for drift. Now that gets magnified when you start looking at schools across a district and having to watch for that drift. Then imagine at the state level. And all the people who are making evaluative judgments about teaching and how do we keep those folks sort of in line. It's got to be a robust system that does dedicate the resources back to that point. A couple other points is one of my favorite things to talk to people about is how many teachers have you ever really evaluated into being a better teacher? Now, as a principal, I had to evaluate and bring some things to the forefront that people needed to see that they either were refusing to see or not, or just it was an intentional decision. But my point here is that we change these instructional behaviors systematically. And that means over time, with support, and in small chunks. A friend of mine likes to say all the time, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so being expected to swallow a whole elephant, it tends to be overwhelming and making those lasting kinds of changes that we're talking about. So the last point is that these systems have to build in place strong coaching. Coaching of coaches that have that common meaning behind the common language and that are really skilled at helping people self-reflect, accurately reflect on their practice. So strong coaches. In my work around the country, what I find is the people who are labeled as coaches and principals really struggle to deliver effective post-conferences. They're still sitting in that 1950s mode of, you come in, you sit down, here's what I got to tell you. Here's what you've got to do, here's what you've got to work on. The problem with that is it doesn't match what we know about changing practice. We've got to create reflective practitioners and practitioners who reflect accurately on their practice, good, bad, and indifferent. The other thing that the first bullet, sort of the point I wanted to make with that, just also in closing, is a lot of times we think of these evaluation systems as ways of getting rid of ineffective teachers. And okay, yes, they do serve that purpose. But there's a vast majority of teachers out there who are just craving conversations around practice and that support to help push them forward as they try to improve. Now, I'm not a pessimist. I believe in a lot of things, and so just sort of as my way of closing, I have a slide that I want you to sort of think about. The Broadway musical or the movie Hairspray. There's a song in there that is, we've come so far, but we've got so far to go. And that's where we are. We have made a lot of progress in this endeavor. But baby, we've got a long way to go in terms of getting it right for children and for the adults in the systems that we operate in. So thank you.
I'm going to try to make 4 quick points in the time I have. I want to say a word about the importance of the principal in the school improvement game. Then I want to say a word about the importance of evaluation in getting good principals. And then a few words about what's deficient in the current evaluation systems. And then I want to share with you 4 national benchmark evaluation programs from 4 different and diverse states. So that's where we're headed. The first point is, at the end of the day, there are probably about 5 variables that you have to have your hand on if you want to drive school improvement. This isn't a big notebook of things. And one of those 5 things is quality of leadership in the building. So so if you say why evaluate principals, it's because they're one of the 5 or so key variables that explain student performance. The second point is that point to the booth. Here we go. The evaluation is only one of a large array of instruments you can use to strengthen the principalship or quality of principalship. So I just throw these up here for you. This is the universe of options you actually have if you're going to try to use leadership as a variable to ratchet up quality of schools. And you can see these things begin to fly in here. These are your leverage points. And you will see momentarily that evaluation is one of a large array of options that you actually have if you want to strengthen leadership. So my point here is it's an important piece of the puzzle, but it's only one of about 10 leverage points you can actually link to evaluation. So can you take that all the way back to the first slide for me? So I won't have to go through all that. All right. So that was point one was leadership matters. Point two is that you're a good man. Thank you. Well, good people, actually. I see two of you up there. Point one is leadership matters. Point two is evaluation is one of the tools you can use to ratchet up the quality of evaluation. Point three is the current state in the area of principal evaluation leaves a good deal to be desired. And here are the major problems. I won't drag you through the long litany of problems, but just the big overview. Oh, sorry. First of all, we don't know much about it, but what we do know. Oh, can you skip over all these to the one that comes after that? Here's what we know, that there's a content side to this and there's a process side to this. So what we know to begin with is that the content of evaluation leaves a good deal to be desired. You can see that from the slide, and I want to reference my colleagues here, Ellen Goldring and Andy Porter and Steve Elliott, who worked on this with us. But principals aren't actually evaluated on what makes a difference for what happens to kids. So that's not a good place to actually start the issue. So that's a fundamental and significant problem. And if you actually want to change student learning, you have to bring the evaluation system into line with what you value, which I think was one of the contributions of the first group this morning when they talked about that. On the process side, this is what we know. It's a very limited architecture for how principals are evaluated. It's often the last phone call that the superintendent actually got the day before your evaluation often is the architecture for the evaluation. So we know overall that both on the content side and the process side, there's a lot of room for improvement here. And then that takes us really to the next issue, which is this. Given this, 3 points I've already made. One, the critical nature of leadership in the school improvement. The value of evaluation is one of the tools to strengthen leadership, and the fact that it's a bit of a sloppy, not well-defined, not well carried off leverage point. What can you actually do to get a purchase on it? And I want to just give you a quick look at what I would consider 4 benchmark states have done to tackle this problem. And they are diverse states. You can see, I see my friends from Ohio here who are in the audience, and New York, and Delaware, and Kentucky. So you get a diverse sense of what's, you have some below the Dixie line, Mason-Dixie line states and above, which has real implications for things you can do and can't do. But when they looked at this, and this wasn't thrown together overnight. I mean, each of these states spent over a year looking at how they could strengthen evaluation. And they all, I think there are 7 dimensions that they focused on, but they all focus on 3 critical issues. Every one of the states came up with this on their own, so I think this tells us something. They all have a fairly big chunk of the principal, and these are statewide systems now, right? So they all have a big chunk on the evaluation piece of the storyline, on the student assessment piece of the storyline in the evaluation story. Kentucky's the most recent one that did this. They load in 40% of the evaluation on student state test scores. Right, so they actually have a narrower band of what that means. Each of the states came up with the need for a 360-degree feedback loop where principals could get feedback from their teachers, from themselves, and in kind of the reflection mode that we heard this morning, and from their supervisor. Again, each state weighs these things differently. Kentucky uses an example because they just finished the work. They count that 30% of the principal evaluation. And then they each have a look at the goal, some goal that the principal has agreed to work on with his or her supervisor from a variety of sources we don't need to go into, but they each pick that. And Kentucky, for example, weighs that 15% of the evaluation. And then they have different, each of the states then branches out a little bit. You can see they have some different things. Ohio really wanted a measure of customer satisfaction, and they have a parent satisfaction measure in there, which was very difficult to construct because parents, we ask parents all sorts of things they really don't know the answers to. And of course, they never say, I'm too stupid to know the answer, I'm too stupid to know the answer, I'm too stupid to know the answers. They fill them out anyway, so you don't get very useful data. So really crafting questions that parents could answer took some trouble, but I think Ohio is probably as good as anybody who's figured that out. Some of the states have a professional development goal, so the principal actually commits to doing something to promote his or her professional development, but it's not take the course, complete the units. It's do something that leads to something that produces a change in the school that leads to an outcome. So the measure is actually all the way through the professional learning cycle to some sort of outcome. And then I think New York actually, this was unique to them. They actually have what we call a drill down on the ISLIC standards, and each of these states are ISLIC states. So they all use the standards. And they zero in on an area of one particular function or two functions within the ISLIC standards, and they emphasize that in the evaluation. So the end point here, I think, is this. This is a, you know, since it's so poorly arranged now and so inadequate, the path to improvement is clearer here. So I think the message from these four states, but also for districts, is that you can put together fairly thoughtful packages of evaluation without over expense and actually use evaluation as a tool to drive school improvement, and then which is, again, going back to the first point, which is the leadership piece. And then I'll just close with this. What you don't see here, and just because of space and time, is each of these, what I've given you is sort of the content of each of these systems. Each of these systems has a very robust process that wraps around this content to bring supervisors and principals into regular and ongoing conversation and discussions about the quality of learning, and puts district online for being responsible for supporting principals to be effective. So there we go. Thank you.
My work with Battelle for Kids will be centered on helping districts and states implement human capital strategies, including evaluation systems, compensation systems, really thinking about the whole human capital line. And what human capital means is, what are the strategies, approaches that districts and states are using to improve the people that work in the organization? So that's what it's about. Before I was with Battelle for Kids, I was with a district in Colorado called Eagle County Schools. Eagle County is a 6,000 student district located in the central Colorado Rocky Mountains. It's about half white and half Hispanic. And Eagle County is an unusual story because it's been doing this kind of work for nearly a decade now. It has a human capital reform that started in 2001, most of which was centered around the professional development, human improvement strategies advanced through the teacher advancement program. So we use the PD model from the teacher advancement program with integrity. However, the district had a performance pay system that was completely locally developed, and I would argue one of the most aggressive systems in the country, in that it completely abandons the step and level pay system. That fact that we were paying people based on measures of performance or market-based measures or student outcome measures was really the driving factor behind why a lot of the changes to evaluation, measuring to educator effectiveness came about. It was the reason for the ingenuity. So Eagle County has a lot of experience being in this place, standing on the edge. And we've all had this kind of experience, right, where you've been out on the edge of the diving board, looking out into the abyss, thinking about all of the things that can go wrong. And so when Eagle County started this in 2001, they looked into that abyss and they jumped. And they made a lot of mistakes, and they learned some things that hopefully can help the rest of the country as we move into this. Sometimes doing what seems like the most natural of things can be dangerous. Schools should be thinking about teaching and learning, right? Teaching and learning. That's what all school organizations are about, those two things. But we've taken up until 2010 to really get serious about defining what those things are and coming up with good measures for them. And if you can't see that, it says, beware of rattlesnakes right in the pet exercise area. So, existing systems can be difficult to change. And I'm talking about the force of the status quo here. Now, this is a ballot box. I think it's from Germany. And I don't speak German, but I plugged in this phrase into like one of these online translators. And basically, it says, don't bend the ballot. As you can see, that's going to be a problem in this system. So this might be an indication of, I'm a University of Kentucky graduate, so this is also a statement about the quality of the football program there. But we haven't beaten Florida or Tennessee since I was in the 3rd grade. But the forces of the status quo are powerful in many. And so I think about the status quo in schools especially as just this 10,000-pound stone, all right, that is just really hard to move, get to change in any direction. And it just requires years of work, pressure to get that thing to finally turn and move. We asked the principals at Eagle County that have been doing this for nearly a decade how long they thought it would really take for a district starting this to really fully implement a human capital, fully implemented human capital approach. And their answer was about 10 years. So you may begin to wonder, was this a good idea? And Eagle County certainly had this experience too. In 2007, the district sort of imploded at the top. Almost all of the district leadership left or was asked to leave. And we were faced with a point of, why don't we just go back and do things the way that everybody else does it? And really, we looked around and said, you know, we've come too far. It's actually easier to go out the other side of this now. And so instead we made a conscious decision not to go back to a step and level pay system just because it would be more destructive at that point than trying to figure out these human capital strategies that we'd implemented. No matter how tough the technical challenge is, so people may throw things in your way that intentionally try to vex and deceive you or complicate things, perseverance and a little ingenuity eventually will pay off. And so I want to talk about measuring educator effectiveness in a framework of inputs and outputs. And I've heard some other speakers talk about that today. And so in terms of input measures, what we're really talking about is the evaluation. And I want to make this statement. Evaluations are first and foremost measures. When we talk about evaluations as ways to improve people, ways to communicate with people, they're legally required documents, but for them to be any good, they first and foremost have to be quality measures. And so we have to pay attention to validity, reliability, credibility, trustworthiness, and authenticity. And I put these things up here because evaluations are not purely quantitative or qualitative measures. They're sort of a blending of both. You're, in many cases, arriving at a quantitative determination as a result of the evaluation process, but there's a human being making a subjective judgment. And so that makes it more of an ethnographic or anthropological data collection. So some of the technical challenges that you face when you implement a quality evaluation system are how do you ensure that validity and reliability? And I would say those two things alone, if school districts around the country just started paying attention to validity and reliability in evaluation systems, we would make tremendous progress in improving them. Are you using a research-validated tool? Are you paying attention to how consistently your evaluators are evaluating people in classrooms? So if we just paid attention to those two things and then started thinking about some of the qualitative aspects, the credibility, the trustworthiness, the authenticity of the information we collect and how it's used. Other questions, how many evaluations do we do? How many evaluators do we have? Do we use peer systems? What are your data collection systems? It doesn't take for a district to become very large that if you have multiple evaluators, multiple evaluations, and multiple data collection points, that you really need a very sophisticated electronic data collection system to manage all this information. I can't imagine what Memphis has. Another thing to think about is observational versus longitudinal. Many evaluation systems are set up where you pop into a room, you mark down what happened, and then you leave. Well, so many times there are aspects of the phenomena of teaching that need to be observed over time. So like, for example, differentiation. If you step into a room for a one snapshot observation and you see whole group instruction and you leave, you would infer, well, that's all that teacher ever does is whole group instruction. In fact, the teacher may use all kinds of different types of differentiation, so you need a longitudinal approach to gather that information. So the evaluation system in Eagle County results in this kind of distribution. As you see, I think it's not what Dan Weisberg wrote about in the widget effect, where everybody exceeds expectations. So that's the kind of data that it generates. So shifting now to output measures. So we have the input side, the evaluation, what are the adults doing in the system, to now the output side, what are the things that the system generates. Well, really we're talking about student achievement or outcome, some measures of those things. And so we have to ask, well, what assessments are you using? No Child Left Behind tests that every state has, some district summative assessments or formative assessments, college entrance exams, end-of-course assessments, or some other kind of individualized outcome measures, or some combination of all these. And so when I go in to consult with districts, the first thing I do is start talking to them about which ones of these do they have in place right now. What are the existing systems they already know and use, and how can they build on those to measure educator effectiveness? The second part of that question is, what is the analysis method you're using? Value-added analysis, the most sophisticated approach that we have in determining educator effectiveness. And it really was designed to answer this question, but it has limitations. We have examples of growth models from all over the country that are not value-added based. We have lots of examples of simple attainment that No Child Left Behind really brought in. What % of your kids are proficient or advanced? And you could also use an indexed or a hybrid approach to some combination of these. Of course, there are trade-offs in every one of these. Value-added, absolutely the most nuanced, sophisticated approach, also the most difficult to explain to people, the most complex technically. Then there's this question of the untested subjects and grades, or the other 70% of teachers that you don't have assessments for. The K-2 teachers, specialist teachers, a lot of high school teachers. We start to step off into, from the world of valid and reliable assessments into the world of promising practices at that point. I think if you look at Hillsborough, Florida, there's a district that's trying some very innovative approaches. You look at Harrison, District 12 in Colorado, using a arena scoring model of getting at this. So there are some districts that are trying some things, and that's what we need to be seeing more of. Some technical challenges. The first one there, not enough people talk about the complexities of the student-to-teacher alignment and getting that right. And if you're just relying on your student information system to make that decision, you're probably not getting good alignment on that. Knowing the limitations of the assessment, knowing the limitations of the analysis method. So some best practices from the field in implementing these kinds of measures. First of all, use several measures. Someone raised a question about, is there a problem when you have these systems that don't agree with each other? Well, ideally, we would want them to agree with each other, but the fact that you have several of them, that gives you more leverage when they all do agree with each other that you're making the right decision. When you don't have that kind of agreement, then you have to slow down and think through, what is the data telling you? Use existing resources and tools. Learn from other places doing this work. You're not alone. There are lots of districts all over the country and organizations all over the country that are doing experiments and trying some really innovative things. We have to shake our fear of innovation and creativity. We have to work together to find local solutions. You can't impose innovation on places. This process works. Plan, pilot, try, fail, learn, and adapt. It's really what we're asking our kids to do. We're asking kids to take something they don't know, give it a go, learn from their mistake, and get better. Well, we've lost that ability as adults somehow. So can we get back to watching the kids, watching how they learn, adapt, grow, and start doing some of those things? So a healthy and workable framework, I think, is that if you have national intent and support, So the national government or the national foundation saying, here's what we would like to see, and providing support for that. State guidance and accountability to districts on how to do that, and then letting the local ingenuity and implementation define how those things occur. In Colorado, Colorado was one of the most poorly funded states in the country. Our per pupil is about $7,400 a kid. And you have 7 districts in Colorado that are experimenting with performance-based compensation and human capital, these innovative human capital strategies. Nobody's forcing them to do it. I wanted to briefly show you some of the results from Eagle County. This goes from 2002 to 2010. You see the purple line on the bottom is the percent of Hispanic students in the district. You see it's changed dramatically over those few years. You see the implementation dip on the green line of the new math program in 2004 and an implementation dip in 2007, a new reading program. One would expect with this dramatic change in student demographics that you would see a decline in attainment-based results. It isn't what you've seen. You've seen a holding of the line on the achievement results, and actually from 2008 on up, it's increasing. So these things are working. When we look at the achievement gap in Eagle County, the gap between the white kids and the Hispanic kids, dramatic increase, dramatic improvement this year on that level. I'll leave you with the value-added analysis for the teachers in Eagle County in grades 3 through 8. Now this is again after around, let's see, in 2007 it would have been 7 years of implementation of these approaches. So in terms of the selection, the induction, the training, the support, the evaluation, the remediation, the removal of teachers to try and improve the whole bell curve, the whole distribution of teacher quality, Eagle County, something's going right. I can't tell because it's a holistic reform. It's strategic compensation, it's evaluation, it's professional development. It's hard to disentangle about what's doing what, but something's working.
And I'm going to be out here with you guys. Jason had a couple of words for you, reliability and validity. I want to add a couple of more, capacity and will. We've had evaluation systems in place for a long time, and I think we've had people chicken to use them. Now, are the systems exactly right? I don't know that we can necessarily wait for them to get completely and totally perfect. I think we're going to have input, and we're going to have a lot of feedback around this, but time's a-wasting, and we're going to be moving on this as quickly as we can in Memphis, and I'm guessing you're going to feel the pressure to do that in your state, in your situation as well. Next slide, please. This is a $90 million slide. We took this slide to the Gates Foundation Intensive Partnership presentation and said, look, even at our best school, #1 in the district, and this is a standardized value add measure that Mathematica Policy Research has calculated for us. That's on the axis that you see that's numbered there on the 1 to -1 there. But what you see is that in the school that is near the lowest performing across the district, we have bunches of teachers who have low value add scores. Now I'm going to tell you that I don't believe that value add is the be all end all, but I got to tell you, when we shared this slide, and I say it fairly glibly too, but a $90 million slide, we have these data, we have the capacity to use these data. But what this says is, back to Matt Springer's point of earlier this morning, we have some students that as you tee them up year after year with these teachers who are down in the 2,343rd performance position, we're going to have limited expectations for those children's performance, right? But even at that school that we would say is the highest in the district, you see those 2 teachers who are reversing the trend perhaps from what a teacher had previously given to them in terms of a product as far as student. And we cannot continue with that. So in Memphis, what we did, and these are actually are set up on a timer so it keeps me moving. So in our position, what we had was the impetus coming from some really important evaluation research. This is it's a seminal work in the field. And I did my training here at Peabody College with Lipsy, with Cordray, with the evaluation staff. And let me encourage you to consult with the evaluation experts near you, colleges, universities. There's a field of evaluation science that really helps provide clarity on decisions. And what we did was saying from our multiple lines of evidence strategy, we were going to have these 4 major components. Now, remember, if you're from Tennessee, the Race to the Top application looks a lot like this. And we feel like the Race to the Top application drew some, I guess maybe strength from this, some inspiration we hope from this. But value added and observation data weigh exactly the same for us in our TEI model. TEI is Teacher Effectiveness Initiative, and that's our Gates Foundation intensive partnership work. And then what we said was 15% would come from teacher content and pedagogical knowledge, and then also 15% from stakeholder perceptions. Without a strong system, as has been said earlier this morning, we're not going to be able to do the other kind of work. But even given the results, we're going to have the capacity and will to take action around that. So, with these 4 as our basis, what we decided was that we're going to have components to put with each of these. Now, it was said earlier, and Tony Bagshaw did a great job in raising this issue, talked about in Tennessee we have the most robust value-added system in the country. However, in terms of data systems, to Jason's point, we don't have access to that right now in the terms of data files like we in our research work typically know. We don't have a big Excel sheet that's got all this stuff. So the data that you're going to see that's in that first slide there, and then also is going to come up, if we can go to the next slide, is that we've had to rely on Mathematica policy research data to get us started. But we're anticipating having access to all the value-added data in the state of Tennessee for our teachers and our students in time. The current year observations, we are testing even this fall a number of observation rubrics. We love the DC impact, but we also know that there are other observation rubrics that are out there. And it's kind of interesting. After DC exited several teachers, there was, I think, a reluctance maybe to go with DC impact as the only model in the state of Tennessee that was going to be tested, and particularly in our district as well, because there's a negative connotation when you start making those tough decisions, capacity and will. Teacher knowledge, we're still working on that. We're going to get with Drew and others about how to put these data into our system and really get at what teachers know about their content area and what teachers know about how to teach, how to actually do the teaching, the pedagogy. And then stakeholder perceptions, we partnered with Ron Ferguson and his group at Harvard with the Tripod Survey, and then with Eric Hirsch and New Teacher Center with the Teacher Working Conditions Survey. So this is basically the scaffolding, the framework with which we are setting up our system. Next slide, please. Oh, and by the way, it's called TEM, Teacher Effectiveness Measurement, and it's 1.0, and I'll get to it in just a second, but we figured that there's probably going to be a 2.0 and a 3.0 and a 4.0. 4.0 would be great. So the highlights here, just a little bit, and I should probably say that I'm doing workshop sessions this afternoon, some breakouts. So I was a little bit aware that you can either say, hey, you know, Barker's okay, I'll go see his thing, or, I heard enough. But here's the thing. If come this afternoon, you'll get the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. The question I want to highlight on that third bullet point down into that the first grouping, is value added a dependent or independent variable? So much of what we talk about is trying to predict or trying to explain value added, and I don't know that that's necessarily the right way to think about this. It's a component for us of a larger understanding of teacher evaluation, but so much of our talk focuses around value added, and there's so many questions that around that, but this multiple lines of evidence approach would say, let's take all of those and put together in a mosaic and look at convergence. A couple more things there. The value-added scores, however, and again, fall victim to my own last comment, but what we did was we actually used DC Impact, went out to schools, and looked at the teachers who have the highest and the lowest value-add scores off that Mathematica data. And what we saw was the domains under the DC Impact actually do look like they associate with teachers who are on the high and low end. Greater competence in those domains, that's the higher value-add teachers. Lower, those are the lower value-add teachers. Very, very preliminary with our work, but suggests we're headed in the right direction. We like to say that teacher evaluation is the right tree to be barking up at this time. Everybody has talked about that. It's the right tree. We may not be completely finished, but it's the right tree to be barking up. So the courageous conversations, I want to highlight that just a little bit. We're going to have those. Jason, his team in DC have had those and taken action on those as well. And then just kind of one quick point too, that in the exiting, in the tenure granting, and all of the big decisions that are going to be upcoming for us, these are going to be guided by teacher-led review boards, such that there is going to be discussion and consensus from teachers as to how to address the shortcomings, middle performance, or outstanding performance of their peers. Next slide, please. So, unlike Jason, I've been at my job a little bit more than 2 weeks, but we did have a name change last week. So we are now Research, Evaluation, Assessment, and Student Information. So we have all of our student enrollment and records and all those things under our shop. And as he talks about the idea of the data system that's going to have to drive all of this, currently we have a box of paper and some big pens. No, actually, we're in the process of trying to develop an integrated system that will pull the pieces of this network together. But when you think about it, it's not just the data. We use SAS and SPSS and all that other kind of good stuff. And but this is really connecting HR data, candidate information. This is all of the tracking that happens at the schools. It's all the PD that has to be entered. It's every piece of information that is germane to the process by which teachers are evaluated, and think about all the touch points around there. So we're looking to, if anybody has an idea too, we'd be very, very interested to talk with you. We have crafted an RFP. We're going to talk about an ERP system to an integration. But what's important to know is that we have some really big ideas about how to put all this in place. We have some extraordinary partners like New Leaders, New Schools. Cheryl's here. We've been working with New Leaders, New Schools, and have, for the past 2 years, done school-wide performance incentive bonuses or recognitions to schools that have had extraordinary performance on the Mathematica data. We have New Teacher Project. We have Teach for America, all with us. So the strategic partnerships for us have been extremely important. But when it comes back to it, the issue, not only reliability and validity of the system, but the capacity and will to make the decisions. Thanks.
Okay, we have about, first thank you for those really provocative presentations. We have about 20 minutes for questions and discussion. I invite anybody to come up to the microphones.
Hi, Kim Fundino from Lebanon, Oregon. Administrative calibration for evaluation is one of our #1 concerns. A lot of us have districts that have a very strong union presence, and the idea of just cause and equitable treatment and an evaluation that can be thrown out because one administrator focused on something that other administrators didn't, and those kind of things. Can you talk a little bit about what is the best amount of time, dedication to training, and that kind of thing from the administrative perspective in terms of calibration to assure maximum efficacy in the evaluation process?
I think Todd can probably talk about it from the teacher advancement program perspective, but in Eagle County, we had 5 consecutive days of full days of training, and the reliability question is really one of degree. I mean, if you had 20 days, you probably would get more reliability. If you had 1 day versus none, that would be better. But so it's all really an amount of how much can you afford, how much can you do, how much would you be willing to accept, and then also what's the quality of that training. Our process was patterned after the teacher advancement program, so I'll probably let Todd talk about that. So.
Well, first of all, I haven't been affiliated with TAP for the last year or so, so I'm going to speak more from my perspective now. And one of the things we work on now is really seeing it as getting those administrators to a baseline of what is sort of minimally acceptable in order for you to feel confident for them to begin this process. But it is just that, it's just a beginning. What you have to then also do, that typically is a training within sort of the typical professional development kind of setting. But one of the things that we do know is that it's different to watch somebody you don't know on tape and talk honestly about them than somebody that you have either preconceived notions or experiences that may be positive or negative and still maintain that objectivity. So one of the things that really needs to occur is work in real buildings with principals, with their administrators. Some of my work right now in Connecticut is actually taking groups of administrators and doing instructional rounds, which is, I think of a lot like medical rounds. You know, you go around and see different patients. But what we do is we take administrators into rooms and then quickly see what the differences are and what they're seeing. What that helps you as a district to begin to know is where there's patterns of misconception and patterns of accurate thought that you can then begin to train around specifically. But I think it's ongoing work. There are a lot of different places that do things like an annual certification. I think that's a step in the right process. But from this May until next May, there again tends to be this issue of drift. And I think it was Jason that talked about really, monitoring the kinds of things that are going on. Not only that evaluations are actually happening, but you have to monitor the quality of that. And then put those supports in place for administrators to ensure that same picture of what they're seeing.
One thing I would add is that through the wonders of video technology, what we're doing is developing a strategy for this fall to do inter-rater reliability training using our video captures. And I would encourage you all to keep your eyes on the MET project, the Measures of Effective Teaching project. It's in 6 districts across the country, and it's Gates funded. And the materials from that, the video materials from that, will be available. And there's going to be, I think, a great opportunity to have conversation around what the training aspects of what effective teaching looks like. So I think there's going to be a broadened conversation, but specifically around video. So I think the challenge I would have for each of you is how can you do that in your districts? What kinds of resources might you be able to make available for that in terms of time and release time and those kinds of things? But what we know and what we've had some success with is, everybody looking at exactly the same thing and then saying, well, according to this rubric, I've got this person as a 5 or a highly effective or a meets expectations or whatever rating there is with that.
Hi, my name is Matthew Cohen. I'm from the Ohio Department of Education. A lot of this has been, we've seen some sort of like the distributions of situations where the evaluations are at either end. This is sort of localized to different places. And so the question really becomes one of how much is this sort of driven by a standard, or how much of this really is a distribution that is determined locally, and does that make a difference and bother people?
Well, I think that you want to use both approaches, really. In terms of the evaluation, you can set expectations for here's what we think quality teaching looks like. Here's how you demonstrate it, create rubrics around that to help evaluators see that through a lens of what quality teaching is. And then that idea of what quality teaching is has to adapt and evolve, right? Like our thinking about what quality teaching looks like has grown over time and continues to adapt and evolve. And so that local standard has to adapt and evolve and grow. Then I also think it's important that you bring in norm referenced or distribution-based approaches to this, like value-added or some maybe outcome-based measures. And hopefully what you have is some correlation between the two.
I'd like to take the question in just a little bit different direction too. When I hear talk about both ends and the way that a system would differentiate, the partner that I didn't mention specifically, but I alluded to in my talk, is our union, the Memphis Education Association, which is affiliated of TEA. And they have been absolutely at the table with us on this project from the beginning. And the consensus in Memphis is that we can't afford to have teaching at the lower end of the spectrum. So in terms of differentiation and in terms of performance, well, we're all in this together, that our students deserve better, but what we're also recognizing is that our teachers deserve better too. And what we haven't been doing is we haven't been supporting teachers well. So there are these folks that I had shown you on this graph, but we haven't told them that's where they're falling. We haven't had a structure in place to do anything about that. We haven't had any timeline for professional development, remediation, or check-ins. So I think the answer is that as we've opened the box in Memphis, what we said, all of us together, especially the union, is that we need to address the performance that's at the lower end of the distribution because it's beneficial for students as we do that.
Peter Donaldson from Washington State. We've heard some of the presenters discuss teacher evaluation and some talk about principal evaluation systems sort of in isolation, and I don't mean to assume that you're speaking in isolation, it's just that that's been the topic. I'm wondering if there's been experiences with people on the panel or in your expertise where both of those systems have been overlaid for drastic and significant changes at the same time, which is what's actually happening in Washington State right now. We have a new law that will require all districts to have both a new principal and a new teacher evaluation system within 2 years. And as a pilot district in our state, that's exactly what we're grappling with. And we're kind of at the point where we're trying to figure out what's the interface between the criteria for teacher evaluations and the interface between the criteria for principal evaluation, and how do we not proceed too quickly and leave one of the systems behind in terms of matching that up. So I'm curious about anything you might add to that.
It's actually the norm. Most states are moving on both of these at the same time. I'm looking at my friends from Ohio. They've got to grapple with both. Delaware is a nice example. They built both systems at the same time, and they're integrated and connected. So I think you actually have some pretty good role models from around the country you could look at.
Yeah, I think from pressure from here in Tennessee is that July 1, 2011, that's our start date. That's our go live date. Every teacher, every year, evaluation. Every principal, every year, evaluation. So I guess I'm kind of envious of you with that 2-year timeline, I have to say. But for us at Memphis, part of our Race to the Top application actually put together the piece that we alluded to in our Gates Foundation proposal, because it was specifically a teacher effectiveness initiative, but we said that you can't have teacher effectiveness fully without principal effectiveness as well.
We're working with several districts in the state of Wyoming, which has legislation that's requiring the same thing. And one of the things that I have found to be very productive is that the same committees are working on both. That when if they aren't, and you've got two different committees, they've got to have strong communication with one another. But we've actually found it more effective for the same group to be working on both at the same time. So you end up with a parallel system where it does parallel, and then also recognizing that there are different responsibilities as a part of defining the two jobs and then doing that. But try not to isolate the work, have it going forward at the same time.
And Colorado is passed Senate Bill 191, which ended, quote unquote, ended teacher tenure and required new definitions of teacher effectiveness and principal effectiveness and the measurement systems around both those. So that's a state that's also developing these. What I think is really exciting is you have a lot of states and districts that are experimenting with this in different ways. I don't think anybody could say, we've got this figured out, here's an out-of-the-box canned approach to this. We're not to that point yet. What's exciting is you have so many people trying some different things, learning, adapting, changing, and hopefully, in a few years we learn some lessons and come up with a really good system.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul Helder, Grand Rapids, Michigan. I think we're in the same boat in that our legislature changed a number of the laws as well. And one of the things that ours did is it's requiring that teacher evaluations be based upon student performance and student scores and things of this nature. And I believe the chunk of the reason that we came down here today is because value-added programs address that issue. And I want to make sure that I understand it, because we don't have value-added where I am right now. So I'm going to ask Mr. Barker, a teacher's value-added ranking or score or whatever is based upon student performance, is it not?
That's correct.
Okay. And a school's ranking is based upon student performance, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So that helps me, okay, because I was a little confused, because when I saw the $90 million slide, I took away that there was an argument being made that value-added performance scores for teachers had led to poor school ranking, but in fact they're both, because students aren't scoring well, then there's a ranking and a teacher score, and they're not causal, it's just correlative.
Well, and I appreciate the question, and I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to get my hands around it.
Yeah, every time I go through that $90 million slide, it does, it registers differently with different people, and I appreciate the question and the clarification. It's that every child has a performance, and I'll talk a little bit about TVOS. Every child in the state of Tennessee has performance from the 3rd grade on, and grades 3 through 8 are big tested areas, and then some subjects in high school. But the TVOS system calculates a predicted score based on all the prior information about that one particular student. So in Mrs. McGillicuddy's class, there are a bunch of predicted scores, and then you look at how the expected scores match up with the observed scores. And if Mrs. McGillicuddy's kids as a whole, and just think about a classroom, those 20, 25 kids, outpace the predicted score, Mrs. McGillicuddy is seen as one of those teachers who's on the top side of the axis. So she would be registering a positive value there. Whereas if Mrs. Jones was not getting her kids up to, or if her children weren't performing to the level of expectation, then what she would be on the bottom side of that. But in fact, the school summary is the summary of all those kids' predicted and observed difference. The teacher is the summary of the class, and then the school is the summary of all those teachers.
Okay, that's helpful. So to better understand, realistically then, your predictive score for student X is based upon how they did the past Y years in their classroom, which is therefore influenced by what's going on with them, but also how the other teachers performed.
That's correct.
Okay. So then, at what stage, I guess my question is, a kindergarten teacher then has no incoming value. A 1st grade teacher only has the incoming value based on who their kindergarten teacher was. At what stage do you start having data you feel comfortable using for evaluation? What age is that?
Well, in the state of Tennessee, it's going to be at the 4th grade level, because we start testing students on a state-mandated exam in the 3rd grade. So the 3rd grade exam would basically predict then the 4th grade performance. So really what you have is the teachers K through 3, and Jason's slide pointed this out too, that the K through 3 performance is not going to have traditional TVOS value-add data in the same kind of way that, say, maybe a 5th grade teacher would. But I think it's one of the challenges and one of the limitations as we talk about this. The state of Tennessee and Tony Bagshaw referred to this a little earlier, but that TEAC committee, the Teacher Evaluation Advisory Committee for the state of Tennessee, has decided that for those teachers who do not have that 35% from value-added scores, from TVOS scores, that they will receive the whole school's value-add score. So the kindergarten teachers' performance evaluation will be populated with the school's value-added results.
Thank you.
I would add that value-added has to be seen as an important part of the puzzle, but it's not the whole picture. It's a powerful analysis instrument that works for some teachers in some grades and some subjects, but there are a lot of teachers that it doesn't cover. So we really have to be innovative in thinking about other ways to measure effectiveness too.
I think we have time for just one more.
Yes, I just wanted to build on Jason's point about principal rounds. I think it was Jason's point, principal rounds in Connecticut. I very much applaud that and wanted to mention something similar that we've developed as a team, which is to train principals in the skills of lesson observation and keeping the school under review. We did this in a district called New Bedford in Massachusetts, high poverty district with about 22 elementary schools, 3 middle schools and a high school. The effect was the professionalization of those principals as instructional leaders. And what they did was, having been trained, they went into each other's schools to review each other's schools. And you know, that's kind of an unheard of thing to do. You don't go into somebody else's classroom traditionally in this profession. You go into somebody else's school. But the actual criteria for what was going to take place was left to the principal of the host school. So he or she would say, like the team to come in and have a look at, we're interested in looking at student work. We're interested in going into classrooms and looking at the quality of instruction. So that there was a softness to the approach. It was left to the host principal to choose. But the net result of it was extremely powerful. And I remember it vividly because at the end of the year, one of those principals came up to myself and the other trainer and said, you know, we'd kind of like to organize something like this regularly outside the context of the program. And we'd also like to meet and have a meal together occasionally. And it was that last point that really struck me. Doctors and lawyers, they go out and have meals together all the time and they talk about stuff. We don't do it as a profession. So it was a real way of creating that kind of collegiality that I was mentioning in my piece earlier. Thanks for that, Jason.
Well, I think the panel has still given us a lot to think about as we go into our afternoon breakout session. So I'd like to say thank you once again. If you could help me.